Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I have an exciting guest. I have Ian, the CEO of Plurilock with me today. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, man. Good to be here.
All right, so do you want to just give a brief summary of the company and what you guys are all about?
Absolutely. Plurilock is a cybersecurity software company. So we make software that allows workforces to be able to authenticate their employees based purely on behavior. So we actually look at how you type on a keyboard and how you move a mouse. And using artificial intelligence, we're able to first build a profile of what's normal for an individual. And then once that profile is built, usually takes a couple of days, we're able to authenticate that individual. Big reason why this is useful is that I'm sure everybody's familiar, passwords are A, not super effective, and B, quite frustrating to use. Whereas human behavior, it's just what you're doing every day. So as you're going about your regular routine, you're sitting down, you're typing, you're moving the mouse, we're constantly in the background verifying that you are in fact the right person. Company went public on the TSX venture this past fall, and we're currently trading as PLUR, PLUR.
Yeah, that's super cool. How long has this software been available?
Well, it's interesting. So the company itself got going around 2016 or so. The idea of this is called behavioral biometrics. So that's the study of how people typically behave throughout their regular day. The idea, though, actually goes back to World War II. So Morse code operators were able to not necessarily know what you were typing in, but as you typed on the telegraph machine, individual operators would have some unique characteristics. And so you could kind of tell like, oh, well, that's Joe, or that's whoever it is who's typing out a message. So that was kind of the original premise behind there being unique characteristics around behavior. Fast forward to kind of the 70s, the 80s, people talked about using keyboards or using similar devices to try and infer behavior. But it really wasn't until kind of the 2010s or so that the idea got further fleshed out. And so nowadays you can see the same type of behavior across a multitude of devices. So if you've ever heard of people trying to gauge who the holder of a phone is, there we go, who the holder of the phone is, that's using behavioral biometrics. What we do using keyboard and mouse, that's using behavioral biometrics. The way somebody walks, right, gait analysis, that's also a type of behavioral biometrics. And so you're seeing more and more of this technology get popularized now that AI has advanced sufficiently to be able to make use of it.
Yeah, no, and it's super important now, just with all the hacking and security problems that have been going on. So do you actually want to talk about where has this software been used so far, and what are some of your clients?
Mm-hmm. It's funny, one of the things that's sometimes challenging about cybersecurity is that the people who need the software the most are the least likely to talk about it, because quite often you'll have a situation where a company or a government institution was breached, and they say, well, as a result of this breach, we need to go procure 23 different pieces of software, but they don't necessarily want to say, yeah, we've been breached and we got all the software. And so as a result, talking about customers is sometimes difficult. What I can say, particularly on the government side, is that if you were to go looking at some of the government filings out there, you'd see that Plurilock has received procurements with institutions like the US Army, like the Department of Homeland Security. In fact, Homeland Security, or DHS, Department of Homeland Security for short, DHS has been a customer of ours for quite a few years now. We're actually on our third contract with them. So that gives you a kind of a flavor of who we typically work with. On the commercial side, think of regulated institutions. So that could be like a bank, could be, even education has a lot of regulation that requires a certain level of due diligence and cybersecurity preparedness. Plurilock today really focuses on the mid-market regulated institutions, whether that's in the government or on a commercial basis. But it's areas where there's a high degree of risk and also a high degree of regulatory need, where you have to buy certain pieces of software in order to just do business.
Yeah, and you actually just recently announced a really big acquisition. Do you want to talk about that? Because I don't think the market realized the significance of it.
Yeah, well, it's been very exciting. So just about a week ago, we announced a fairly large acquisition. So we announced that we've acquired a company called Aurora. They're based out of Southern California. And what's really special about Aurora is they have tremendous distribution, both on the federal government, state, local, and education, or what's shortened to SLED, state, local, education, and then commercial clients as well. And so the Aurora acquisition for us really means a tremendous amount of accretive revenue, a tremendous amount of distribution. So think of when you're selling to a customer, an enterprise, you not only need to go in and say, look, this is why you need it, here's the cost benefit, here's the ROI, but then to actually procure the system or product or service, whatever it is that you're selling, in a lot of cases, you either need a master services agreement or what's called a contracting vehicle. And so without that piece of paper between you and the customer, or you and the reseller and the customer, or you and the distributor and the reseller and the customer, it can, even though there's a need and there might be money, it can really slow down the sales cycle. And so what Aurora represents is sales acceleration, because they already have a lot of these contracting vehicles, both at the state and federal level, to be able to sell more easily to those end customers. So we're tremendously excited. I mean, it's still very early days. Aurora, as of 2020, reported approximately 35 million Canadian in top line revenue. We're very excited about what 2021 is going to bring.
Are you on track to beat that 35 million of revenue this year as well for Aurora?
Yeah, so we're not actually giving forward-looking financial guidance or information right now. What I would say is that it's still very early days. I mean, look, it's only, when we're recording this, it's April 6th. But I think that the need ultimately for cybersecurity software is going to continue to go up. Doesn't seem to be any shortage of ransomware attacks or data breaches that are occurring. And so if you think of what are the primary drivers for procuring cybersecurity solutions, the first is regulation, which we talked about. The second is, look, are the bad guys still there? Are the bad guys increasing? What we're seeing is that the bad guys are actually increasing because it's becoming more and more financially lucrative to go after an institution, steal their data, and then sell it on the dark web. That wasn't necessarily always the case, especially if you think about 20 years ago, when companies were first getting online, there wasn't as much of a marketplace for the buying and selling of illicit data, whereas now there is. And so there's actually a financial motive for the bad guys to go after healthcare institutions, financial institutions, right? They make money by doing this. And so as a result, market dynamics, I think everybody's familiar with. What we're seeing is an increase in bad guys, in attacks that are occurring. And so as a result, for cybersecurity vendors like Plurilock and also like Aurora, it just means that there's a greater driver for needing our products and solutions.
No, for sure. And with COVID and before COVID, did you find there was a big difference in demand, or did you see that it was pretty much the same?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the big thing that we saw with COVID, and we're still seeing that today, is that there's a shift in IT strategy. And so what I mean by that is the old way of doing things were, if you think about a traditional business, you would go into an office building, there might be a security guard at the front desk, you'd go through an elevator, maybe you have a card, that you tap to get through the elevator. You go up to your floor, maybe you have a key, you sit down, so you open the door, you sit down in the computer, you log in if you're logging a password, and then everything that you do is within that corporate network. And there's a firewall if you go out into the internet, and it protects badness from coming in, and it filters your traffic going out. So that was the old environment. With COVID, you lost a lot of those protections. You are not going into the office anymore. And so you lose all of those identifying characteristics about who's actually coming onto the premises. When you go and sit down at your computer, there was an assumption that you had a certain amount of confidence that it was the right employee who sat down at that computer. Well, now with COVID, maybe you're connecting in on that computer, but you're at home. And so you don't necessarily know who else is at that home. There's a lack of those physical controls. Even once you're logged on, then the question is, are you still protected by a firewall? Because keep in mind that firewall for your business was actually physically at that building in a lot of cases, and you don't have that at home. So there's a lot of protections that are no longer available with this new work from home environment. And so what we're seeing, and certainly what other companies are seeing, is that there's been a shift of procurement and strategy around adapting to this new normal. And so being able to ascertain the identity of the worker continuously throughout the day obviously is very, very important to that. You want to make sure that it's the right worker who's accessing patient data or who's accessing customer data, right? Who's processing credit card payments. So there's a lot at stake to make sure that it's the right person throughout the day. And what we're seeing in this new normal or post-COVID environment is that it seems like businesses are just accepting that this type of work is going to remain this way going forward. Maybe we go back to the office at some point, but it's probably not going to be 5 days a week, right, for 8 hours a day. Maybe it's 3 days a week, and we still need to accept the fact that the employee is going to be working from home or from Starbucks or from a coffee shop somewhere. And you need to provide an equal level or better protection for those employees. So that's been, I think, the big shift is this shift in spend to technologies and solutions that are a little bit more configurable, that are more versatile in this new working environment.
Yeah, it's kind of, how do you have security without security for everyone that's all around when they're not in one spot. And that's exactly what you guys can provide. So no, that's awesome. I do have a question for when I'm typing, if I ever say like I broke a finger and so now I'm going to be typing different than I would have been, can I call you guys and tell you, or how would that work?
Yeah, so very common question. So think of when you're first creating a new password. So you type in your password, the system might ask you to double check your password, you type it again, and then once you do that, then it's set. If you then forget your password, there's usually a process where you call, usually it's the help desk, or there may be some sort of self-service mechanism if there's some other way to prove your identity. And then when you reset that password, then you re-enroll the password, and then you go about your day. With behavioral biometrics, it's the same sort of idea. If you go in and you enroll your behavior, and enrolling, by the way, is usually just let's observe what you're typically doing on the keyboard over a certain amount of time. If you enroll that behavior and then you need to reset that behavior, it's the same workflow. So call the help desk, or maybe there's a self-service option, say, look, I need to reset my profile, and then you re-enroll, and then you can carry on. And so whether that's you've broken your finger, maybe you sprained your wrist because you went skiing and you're not an expert skier yet, or whatever happens, then there is that ability to go through and re-enroll. What we've found in practice is that doesn't usually come up very often. In other words, most of the time we can adapt with the inherent uniqueness for an individual, and particularly their what's called organic drift. So we'll get a little bit technical here for a second, but think of even just when you're typing in your password. When you first type in your password, it's going to be a little bit slow because you're still learning it, right? You haven't developed that muscle memory yet. What happens over time, though, is you get better, you develop muscle memory. And that process of developing that muscle memory and speeding up or becoming more efficient with your typing is fairly consistent. And so it's what we call organic drift, where it's a little bit different than what we saw yesterday or 2 days ago or 7 days ago, but it's still within the norm of what we expect your behavior to evolve as. So because we're using AI in the background and AI plus machine learning and some statistical analysis, it's all bundled in, we're able to observe what that organic drift is. As long as it's within an acceptable range, then you're still going to have access. But it can then adapt to the fact that, look, how you're interacting today is going to be different than 6 months from now, or vice versa. So that's all built in, and that's what's part of what makes the system itself so inherently scalable, is that it doesn't need a lot of human intervention to go and say, look, Ian sprained his wrist, reset or slow down the profile or whatever. That all happens automatically.
Yeah, because it's taking the knowledge from different parts of the computer, because like you said, the mouse and the keyboard. So is that right? If I'm moving my mouse, it's kind of following along with how I move and how quick I click and where I'm moving it. Is that
100% correct? Yeah. And so we're looking at things like the speed, rhythm, and cadence of how you type on the keyboard. On the mouse, we're looking at direction of movement, speed of movement, change in direction, change in speed, click, double click, scroll, but then also the relationship between the mouse and the keyboard. Crucially, though, we're not looking at what you do. We're only looking at how you do it. And so it's in some senses, it's actually much more privacy friendly compared to either other security solutions or even, think about a CCTV camera, security camera in a bank, right? Like it's very invasive because it's looking at everything. It's actually, in a lot of cases, you have cameras pointed to, cash registers. And so you actually watch employees' fingers, where are they going? Where is the money going? It becomes very, very invasive. Whereas what we're doing with Plurilock is we don't care what you do. We don't care if you're typing an email or playing a video game or what have you. We only look at how you do it. And so as a result, it's able to work in any language. So you can be typing English, you can be typing French, Spanish, doesn't matter to us. Because again, we're not looking at the contents. In comparison, there are certainly software out there that will do keyword analysis. So if you type a credit card number, for instance, you'll actually get an alert saying you shouldn't be dealing with credit card numbers because that's sensitive data and you don't want that to get into the wrong hands. So it'll actually alert that you're typing, a credit card number. Employees feel that that's invasive, and it is to a certain extent because the system is literally watching what you type. Whereas again, what we're doing is we're saying, look, we don't care what you do. We don't even look at what you do. All we want to do is we want to make sure it's the right person on the device. And from that, provides a much higher level of safety and assurance that it's authorized.
Yeah, and is the software applicable for any computer device, such as like a MacBook or a Windows, anything like that?
Yeah, so I'm on a Mac today, and software runs fine. It can run on Windows. We see a lot of demand for virtual desktops or remote desktops, so that's pretty common as well. Again, we're very focused on the workforce user. And for the most part, you're still seeing a lot of Windows and Mac users when you're dealing with regular workforce activities.
Yeah, no, for sure. Are you allowed to say what the revenues have kind of looked like for Plurilock in the last quarter?
Yeah, so we're just in a blackout right now for the most recent quarter. Certainly, folks can go on to CDAR and check out the filings from Q3 of 2020, which was our last financial period that we reported. And then our next set of earnings are coming out just towards the end of April. So we're just right in that preparatory phase right now. But the other thing to look out for is because of the size of this acquisition of Aurora, we're also putting out a BAR report or a business acquisition report. And so there'll be some additional financials coming out shortly, likely in April as well. So lots of reading material to consume here over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, no, for sure. Do you have any competitors in the space doing the same thing that you guys are?
It's a good question. There are a number of companies out there that also leverage behavioral biometrics. So certainly we're not the only company that uses this type of technology. We're a little bit different in that we focus on, again, the workforce. You've heard me say that a whole bunch. And I think the reason that's important for us is we want to look at the same person over a long period of time to validate and make sure that it's in fact the right person throughout the day. The other way you could use this technology is you could use this for users of some other company's system. So for instance, think of a bank, right? We would go in and protect the bank managers and the tellers. Certainly there are other companies who could deploy a similar type of behavioral biometrics to validate that it's the right bank customer or bank user who's logging into their online bank account. Or maybe they're going in to do a wire. The difference there is that those online users are typically higher in volume. They're lower in duration. So you may only log in for a couple of minutes to check a online balance and pay a bill and then do a wire and then you log out. It's a fairly short interaction. And so as a result, we don't feel that the technology is as well suited there as comparison to that employee, the bank teller who's there 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. So I think that's one big difference. Certainly when you get into the cybersecurity industry, it's very fragmented. There are a lot of names out there, both very large companies, also very small companies. It's not uncommon for a given institution, bank, hedge fund, et cetera, to have tens of cybersecurity solutions, right? And that's everything from email security to firewalls to encryption, antivirus, endpoint detection and response, and then all of those systems are going to create data or alerts or logs, and so that goes into log management and security incident and event management systems. So it's a fairly diverse ecosystem. And what we've found is that we fit in very well for companies that are looking for identity assurance, and then we plug into those other companies or those other products that do their own stuff. So for instance, we don't do anything for antivirus. We would much rather integrate with or partner with traditional antivirus solution provider. One of the things that I say a lot is that cybersecurity is a team sport. There's no one company that can do it all. You really have to play nicely with others in order to deliver a solution that actually protects the customer.
Oh yeah, that totally makes sense. My next question that I had was, what kind of patents do you have?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so this is an area where the intellectual property is definitely very valuable. So we have a number of issued patents in the United States for being able to continuously authenticate and identify people. We just announced another provisional patent earlier this spring. And so really what that means is that not only do we have an existing base of technology with good protection around it, but we're continuing to invest in research and development. And so that comes in the form of additional patents, additional innovations, where we're able to continue to build up that moat and prevent competitors from coming up behind us, being able to replicate what we're doing. I think for us, the field of what we're doing is very focused on identity of people. And so most of the innovations that we have are really geared towards being able to identify that person in a way that is frictionless, in a way that doesn't require that user to go through any additional hoops, but really just kind of works invisibly in the background to verify and protect that it is in fact the right person throughout the day.
And have you had really good feedback on your software?
We've had all sorts. I mean, absolutely. We have, probably one of the most common pieces of feedback is that this almost appears too good to be true, or when you actually see the software demonstrated, it almost appears like it's magic. We really actually have to go. We put a lot of effort into the demonstrations where we actually show people what the system is doing in the background. Because again, the typical user of this product doesn't interact with it that much. It's behaving silently in the background based on what the user is doing. So we really have to go out of our way to actually show, look, here is Ian typing on the device. We'll usually give the keyboard controls to the customer or to whoever it is that we're demonstrating the product with. They're able to then type, and as soon as they start typing or moving the mouse, you actually see the alert levels start to creep up, right? Both in terms of the alerts themselves, and then also we can visualize it, and you see the risk start to increase and increase and increase until the point where it gets, look, this is clearly not Ian anymore, and then the system in some cases is configured to lock it out, right? And so the risk has reached such a high level that the intruder is locked out. Notification goes to my smartphone saying your desktop was locked for such and such reason, and then we unlock it and we kind of go through and say, look, if this were a bad guy, right, here's where the system would have started to detect something suspicious. Here is where the system took action, and then here is where the system actually locked out the user entirely. So it's good, and it's something that I've encouraged folks who are interested in the technology to reach out to us and actually get a demo. Because it is something that it's really fun to go and actually show people how it works.
Yeah, that sounds super cool. Have you tested it to see how long it takes for your software to say this is an intruder?
Yeah, what's really interesting about behavioral biometrics in particular is that it's tunable. So you can speed it up or you can slow it down depending on what you're trying to achieve. So think about if you want something that has a hair trigger, let's say, you can actually tune the system so that it's very sensitive. It takes action immediately on the first sign of anything suspicious or anomalous. If you do that, the downside or the trade-off that you're making is that it's potential. You have a potential there for a false alarm, right? So think of a situation where you're typing away, phone rings, right? You pick up the phone and you want to keep sending that email, so you keep typing with one hand and then you hit enter. If you set the system to be too sensitive, that authorized interaction might trip the system. It might flag it. Now, the worst thing that's going to happen here is that the security team gets too many alerts. And the way to deal with that is you have it more of a balance where you say, look, the system can take 10 seconds or 30 seconds or even 2 minutes before it starts to trigger an alarm. And that's an appropriate amount of time to reduce the risk that we're trying to reduce within the system or within the organization. So you can also put the system into monitor only mode where you don't take action at any time, but you still collect all that data. And so you can experiment, right? And what we found is that customers typically like to have a series of configurations where for some of their lower risk users, they have one set of behaviors. For the higher risk users, you have another set.
Yeah, so your software is really cool in the way that it almost acts as a phone password in the sense that you can adjust how many times you can type in that password before getting locked out. So if I typed it in once, I could get locked out forever. Or if I'm really bad at typing in my password, I could say, oh, well, I want to be able to type it in like 3 times before I get locked out forever. So I think that's another thing that's really cool about your software. And that's why I really like it as well.
Yeah, I think the big thing you're hitting on is configurability, being able to adapt the technology to different environments. One of the things that I was surprised about in the journey of building Plurilock is that most, even small companies, are very diverse. Everybody has different hardware. Everybody has different ways they want to work. Everybody has different patterns of their behavior. So in some cases, you might have people who love going into the office. In some cases, you might have salespeople who never want to go into the office. And you need to, as a security professional, you need to be able to account for both types of environments. And so the crucial thing with any technology, but especially with Plurilock, is being able to configure an option to offer that versatility to our customers, to be able to say, look, if you need something that is very, very sensitive and that will react very, very quickly, we can configure Plurilock, or you can configure Plurilock to work in that way. On the other hand, if you need something that's entirely passive, that's monitor only, there's no active user involvement, then you can configure it that way too. And there's no right answer, but it's really about how do you use the tool for the problem that you're trying to solve.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. And yeah, just like you said, it's very pretty much like versatile and can configure to the person and what their nature is and how they want to work. And if there's someone who likes to make sure they type in the correct password or something like that.
Right.
Do you want to talk about 3 of your top goals for the company going into 2021?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. We actually set out and did a goal setting exercise just before Christmas, and we had 5 catalysts that we were saying that we wanted to accomplish in 2021. The first one, I won't go through all of them, but effectively we've already accomplished a number of them. So we wanted to grow our existing sales team, which we've already done. We communicated the new hires that we made. We wanted to complete an acquisition, and we're very excited that we were able to do that. I think looking beyond where we are today and into the rest of the year, the big thing is going to be integration. Taking this new acquisition that we just made, integrating it into the existing Plurilock family, being able to realize the synergies, which involve cross-selling the Plurilock product to Aurora's customer base, and also being able to leverage some of their capabilities and their professional services team back into the core Plurilock offering. And so really for us internally, what we're going to be focused on is integrating, making sure that this acquisition was successful. And I think that, beyond that, ultimately, it just comes back to customers, being able to continue to deliver on existing customers, land new customers, and ultimately keeping them safe in a way that, is easier to use. And that's really what we focus on pretty much every day at Plurilock is being able to deliver that level of security that is easier than than traditional ways.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks so much, Ian.
Awesome, thank you.